Welcome to Module 3, which is where we move past our foundational work and our annual update and move on to action. Now, up to this point, you've created a foundational document that details your school counseling program's beliefs, vision, and mission. It summarizes the services you offer and lists the broad standards that you want your students to master. It's your rock or foundational document that says your school counseling program has a solid foundation, that it's a vital and important part of the total school environment. And though you'll want to review your foundational document every year, it's fairly solid and fairly consistent from year to year. Then you created your annual update, a summary of what the counseling office looks like this year, who you are, who you serve, where counselors spend their time, and what you do. And importantly, you also reviewed the most recent student data on achievement, attendance, and discipline. You may have also included data on your student needs assessment and pinpointed the most significant and current student needs that you then converted into your student outcome goals. Now, the first step in Module 3 is to go to Step A2 and pull up your student outcome goals report. This summary document shows you your 2 or 3 student outcome goals, the text of your SMART goals, a table listing some possible root causes on the left, and some possible strategies to address the root causes on the right. This is just a summary document that reminds you that your strategies on the right side are eventually going to become your student learning objectives in your lesson plans. You'll create these student learning objectives that focus on what students will learn, new information, or what mindsets will change, or new skills they'll adapt in order to address the root causes on the left, which will hopefully result in improved student outcomes in your SMART goal. Now, normally I'd print this document for your next steps, but you really don't need to because very soon you'll see the same information as we begin making your lesson plans. To start lesson planning, click on the pencil icon in To-Do item A3, create classroom large group and small group lesson plans. Then click on Add a lesson plan or unit, and that opens this handy dandy lesson maker process. You'll start at part 1 to select the SMART goal you want to work on first. Then be sure in each of these steps to click where it says this section is complete so you can go on to the next step. In part 2, you'll see your selected SMART goal plus that cool table of root causes and strategies, which we just looked at, which allows you to begin writing your student learning objectives for this goal. We also give you sentence stems that start with students will, so you can fill it in with students will learn, what they're going to learn, students will do or complete or experience, what students will believe as a result of your classroom lesson. Remember, these will eventually become your pre- and post-test questions to see if students gained in your student learning objectives. Now, we suggest you click Add another learning objective for each one of these learning objectives instead of using the bulleted list within each box. Write at least 2 or 3 learning objectives if you can, and then click This section is complete and go on to Part 3. Part 3 lets you select if you want your pre- and post-test question to be based on a Likert scale measure, like strongly agree to strongly disagree, for example, or if you want it to be an open-ended question item, or if you want to use both, you get to choose. Likert scale questions are much easier when it comes to scoring, but using one or the other or both, again, is up to you. You also get to choose how many Likert scale responses you want, from 3 responses to 5 responses, and exactly what kind of wording you want to use in your Likert scale, such as very important to not important, or agree to disagree, etc. In Part 4, simply distinguish between whether this is a single standalone lesson plan or a series of lesson plans contained in a unit. If you choose unit, you'll see this text box, which reminds you that a unit has to have at least 2 lesson plans in it to be considered a unit. We'll come back and show you how to create a unit with multiple lesson plans in a moment, but for now, we'll continue looking at a standalone lesson. Click on This section is complete and go on to Part 5. In Part 5, you'll be asked to add in some details about your standalone lesson, including the lesson title, who will deliver the lesson, which can include the name of someone you already have entered, or go down to the bottom of this drop-down box and you can click on someone not listed here to add in the name of an additional individual or individuals. Next, add in the expected grade level or levels of your target audience, how many students you predict or guess will be receiving your lesson. Again, a guess is fine. And the approximate planned length of your standalone lesson. Once you're done, make sure to click This section is complete in Part 5, jump down to Part 6, which allows you to add even more detail to each lesson plan in your unit, including any materials you'll need, which can be none if you wish, just put that in there, how you will introduce the lesson, including some of the actual wording you might want to use to start the lesson. Then list out in bullets or numbers each step of how you will actually teach the lesson content, including any activities, etc. And finally, your wording for how you want to close or summarize the lesson. Now, at first you may feel this information, this level of detail is too much and not needed, but think of it as a set of details that you could pass on to anyone else. So if they needed to teach the lesson for you, they were able to do it. Or if you're like me, the details help you remember from year to year how you taught the lesson the year before. Sometimes these details can be super helpful. The last step in the development of your lesson plan is to associate your lesson to one or two student standards. As a reminder, your student standards are the mindsets and behaviors you chose to use back in Module 2, or another set of student standards that you created or developed or plan to use, or some combination of both. Associate this lesson plan with up to 2 standards. We limit you to 2 because right now that's just easier to do. Now, this also allows your school counseling lesson plans to be standards-based, just like a math teacher's lessons or a science teacher's lessons are also standards-based. Having standards resonates with principals and school leaders, so it's good to make this final connection. Once you click "This section is complete" in Part 7, you'll have a final option to publish your lesson plan. This simply means you give us permission to share your lesson plan with anyone else in Basecamp who's working to address a similar goal or a similar standard or set of standards. It's completely fine if you choose not to share your lesson plan, and if so, just leave this section blank. Again, the decision is totally yours. Now that you have finished all of these steps, you can print or save your lesson plan if you'd like, and you are done. Know that even though we took time to walk through this process and these steps, it actually speeds along fairly quickly once you have it all down. Before we leave, let's jump back briefly to Part 4 and explore what you would do if you choose to create a unit, which includes 2 or more lessons. When you develop a unit, you complete the same first 3 parts of the lesson planning process, just as you would for a standalone lesson. Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. That's because all of the lessons in your unit, even if delivered on different days, and this is important, all of the lessons address the same SMART goal, the same learning objectives, and of course, we'll use the same pre- and post-test questions. And you would only give the post-test after you have taught all of the lessons in your unit. So each of the lessons will also be correlated to the same student standards that you identified earlier in Part 6. For now, all you need to do in Part 4 is select the unit and go to Part 5 to name your unit. And just as you did for a standalone lesson, select the appropriate grade levels, guess or predict how many students will complete the lesson and the estimated length of the lesson, and click on "This section is complete" to go on to Part 6 to select up to 2 of your student standards that align with this unit. Remember, these standards will apply to all of the lesson plans in this unit. Now, it's time to add in the details of each of your lessons in your unit, which you do by first clicking on the pencil icon in that little handy table labeled Lesson Plans just below Part 6. Click on the pencil icon next to Lesson 1, for example. It will take you to Lesson 1 details with 5 parts. Now, remember, you've already completed Parts 1, 2, and 3. They're already done because your goal, what students will learn, and your pre-post-test questions were already established earlier for the entire unit. All you need to do here is click on Part 4, and just like you did with a standalone lesson, add in the Lesson 1 title and who will deliver the lesson. Note that you've already identified the target audience grade level, anticipated number of students, and planned length of the session or the lesson. All of this is pre-populated for you, which we think is pretty handy. So Part 4 moves pretty quickly. Once you click "This section is complete," go on to Part 5, where you will add more details about Lesson 1 in your unit, including any materials, how you plan to introduce the lesson, teach the lesson, and wrap up the lesson. And once you've done that for Lesson 1, go back to the lesson plans table and do the same process for Lesson 2, Lesson 3, and so on. And that is how you enter information about lesson plans into units and standalone lessons. At this time, our online learning platform doesn't allow you a way to upload an existing lesson plan or an activity sheet, or perhaps a lesson plan you've purchased through an evidence-based program like Second Step, for example. But for now, you can either type in the information for the lesson plan yourself, or add a link like a Google Docs link somewhere online so that it's in your lesson. Just make sure if it's a copyrighted lesson that you give appropriate attribution to the appropriate group. Again, this process may seem a bit complicated at first, but it really does get easier as you work through it. Remember, if you get stuck or lost along the way, just contact us by clicking on the purple button titled Support, and we will be happy to help you out.